The last thing I expected to hear while I was 7 months pregnant was my husband's girlfriend laughing in my own kitchen. Not just laughing. Laughing like she belonged there. I stood in the hallway with a laundry basket pressed against my swollen belly, one hand on the wall because my back had been killing me all afternoon, and I heard her voice float out from the dining room. "Don't worry," she said, soft and smug. "She's not going anywhere. She's pregnant, not stupid enough to start over right now." Then my husband, Ethan, laughed. I remember the exact sound of it. Not the laugh of a man who loved his wife. Not even the laugh of a man who felt guilty. It was the laugh of someone who thought he'd already won. I froze so hard my fingers went numb around the handle of the basket. The woman's name was Brielle, and she had a voice like honey over glass. Pretty, polished, and sharp enough to cut. She had moved into Ethan's life so quietly that at first I thought she was just a coworker from his construction company. Then she became the woman he had to take calls from every night on the back porch. Then the woman whose perfume clung to his jackets. Then the woman whose lipstick I found on a coffee cup in his truck. I asked him about it once, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're emotional because of the pregnancy. Don't start inventing problems." He had actually said that to me while I was crying in the bathroom at 3 in the morning. That was the moment I realized I was no longer dealing with a husband. I was dealing with a man who had decided my pain was convenient. So when I heard Brielle in my dining room, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the basket across the hallway like people do in movies. I stood there in the dim light, one hand on my belly, and smiled. Because by then, I had already started making my own plans. And Ethan had no idea. My name is Claire Bennett, and if you had met me 2 years ago, you would have thought I had the perfect life. I had a husband with a good salary, a house in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, and a baby on the way after 3 years of trying. People always told me I was lucky. They saw the wedding photos, the baby shower pictures, the matching mugs in our kitchen, and they thought I had landed in one of those clean, tidy lives people brag about on Christmas cards. What they did not see was how hard I had worked to keep that life together. Ethan and I met when I was 28 and working as a case manager for a nonprofit that helped families avoid eviction. He came into the office because his younger brother was behind on rent. Ethan was broad-shouldered, charming in that rough-hewn Ohio way, the kind of man who looked comfortable fixing a fence and grilling burgers and talking to old neighbors over the driveway. He thanked me after the appointment, then came back the next week with homemade cookies from his mom. The week after that, he asked me to dinner. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't rich. He wasn't the kind of man who swept you off your feet with grand gestures. He was steady, and after a few years of dating men who were all promises and no substance, steady felt like safety. When he proposed, it was in his grandmother's backyard under string lights, with his whole family cheering like we had just won the lottery. His mother cried. His father slapped me on the back and called me the best thing Ethan ever brought home. Even Ethan's younger sister Nikki, who was usually guarded and hard to read, hugged me and said, "You're good for him." I believed them. I married him because I wanted a family. Because after growing up in a house where my mother worked double shifts and my father came and went like a weather system, I wanted something solid. I wanted a home that felt permanent. I wanted someone who would choose me every single day. For the first year, he did. Then he got a promotion. That was when everything started to tilt. At first, it was small things. He stayed later at work. He got more secretive about his phone. He started changing his shirts before coming into the bedroom, as if he didn't want to bring the smell of his day home with him. He stopped asking me how I was feeling, even when I was sick from the pregnancy in the beginning. He stopped touching me unless he wanted something. When I told him I was exhausted, he said, "Welcome to adulthood." When I told him my feet were swelling, he said, "That's what happens when you eat too much salt." When I told him I was scared because the baby had been kicking strangely one night, he told me I was being dramatic and making a big deal out of nothing. It's amazing how lonely a marriage can become while two people are still sharing the same bed. By the time I was 4 months pregnant, I had started seeing cracks everywhere. There were bank statements I didn't recognize, purchases at restaurants I'd never been to, gas station receipts from parts of town Ethan had no reason to visit. Once, while he was in the shower, I saw a text preview on his phone that said, "Last night was worth the risk." That message changed something in me. I didn't confront him right away. I know that sounds unbelievable, but I needed to be sure. Not because I wanted to preserve the marriage at any cost. I needed clarity. I needed facts. I needed to know whether I was dealing with suspicion or truth. So I started paying attention. I saved screenshots when I could. I photographed receipts. I wrote down dates. I opened our joint account statements and noticed transfers that were suddenly getting routed to a separate savings account I had never been told about. Ethan had always handled the finances because you've got enough on your plate. I had trusted him. He had used that trust like a lockpick. Then one night, he came home after midnight, smelling like another woman's perfume. Not a subtle trace, not a random scent that could have drifted in from a restaurant. It was the kind of scent that lingered in the room after someone had stood too close to you for too long. I stood in the kitchen under the fluorescent light and said, "Where have you been?" He didn't even blink. "Work dinner." At midnight, we closed a deal. With who? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something cold in his expression that made my stomach sink. "You're interrogating me now? I'm asking a question. Maybe stop acting like the world revolves around your pregnancy." I remember gripping the edge of the counter because my knees had gone weak. I asked him again, slower this time. "Are you seeing someone else?" He let out a long, "You what I'm talking about. You see what I'm talking about." He walked away after that. And because I was pregnant, because I was tired, because I still loved the version of him I had married, I let him. That was my first mistake. My second mistake would have been staying silent forever. Luckily, I was not as helpless as Ethan believed. I had spent years helping other people survive bad situations. I knew how fast a life could collapse when one person controlled all the money and all the story. I knew how manipulation worked. I knew that abusers didn't usually start with violence. They started with doubt. They made you question your own memory. They made you feel impractical for wanting proof, dramatic for wanting respect, and ungrateful for expecting decency. So when the truth finally landed in my lap, I didn't panic. I documented everything. The turning point came in a grocery store parking lot. I had gone in for ginger ale and crackers because the baby had been making my stomach turn all afternoon. When I came back out, I saw Ethan's black pickup truck parked across the lot near the pharmacy entrance. At first, I thought maybe he'd stopped for something too, until I saw him leaning against the truck beside a woman in a red coat. She was younger than me by a few years, maybe late 20s, with long blonde hair and expensive boots. Her hand was on his chest. His hand was on her waist. I stopped walking. Then she rose up on her toes and kissed him. Not a quick accidental kiss. Not a greeting. A real kiss. Familiar. Comfortable. The kind that says, "This has been happening for a while." I don't know how long I stood there. All I remember is the way my face went hot, then cold. The parking lot noise faded. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Ethan pulled back first and looked over her shoulder. Our eyes met from about 40 feet away. For 1 second, his expression flashed with shock. Then it settled into anger. That anger is what confirmed everything. Not surprise, not guilt, anger. As if I had interrupted him. He said something to her, and she glanced at me before getting into a white SUV parked beside his truck. He walked toward me slowly, jaw clenched. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I stared at him. "I could ask you the same thing." "It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed. The cliché was so insulting it made my eyes burn. "You just kissed another woman in public." He lowered his voice. "Not here." "Oh, so there's a better location for cheating?" He stepped closer and hissed, "Do you want to make a scene?" I looked around the parking lot. People were loading groceries. A kid was dragging a shopping cart. A woman across from us was watching, pretending not to. I realized then that Ethan wasn't embarrassed by what he'd done. He was embarrassed that I had seen it. That was when I knew the marriage was over. Not because he kissed someone else. Not because he lied. Those were awful enough. The ending came the moment he looked at me like my pain was an inconvenience to his reputation. I went home that night and did not speak to him until morning. While he slept, I opened my laptop. I found a family law attorney named Marisol Vega after midnight and sent a message through her website. I wrote, I'm 7 months pregnant, and I think my husband is hiding money and having an affair. I need to know what my rights are. She called me by 8 the next morning. Marisol was calm, direct, and impossible to rattle. Her voice had the steadiness of somebody who had seen every kind of breakup there was and was no longer impressed by any of them. She told me to stop guessing and start collecting. Copies of all account statements, pay stubs, credit card charges, tax returns, mortgage papers, insurance policies, anything with my name on it or his. She also told me to open a separate account at a different bank and begin transferring only what I was legally allowed to protect myself and the baby. Do not tell him you're leaving until you've already left, she said. And if he's been moving money, we'll need to document that too. By the end of the week, I had a binder. Yes, a binder. People think betrayal happens in dramatic tears and slammed doors, but sometimes it happens in a quiet bedroom while a pregnant woman sits on the edge of the bed with her laptop open, typing out her own rescue plan. I saved bank records showing Ethan had been funneling money from our joint account into a separate investment account under his name alone. I found credit card charges for hotels, jewelry, spa visits, and dinners for 2 at places he had never taken me. I found a monthly apartment lease in Brielle's name with Ethan listed as an emergency contact. I found proof that he had used part of the money from my late aunt's inheritance, which had been deposited into our joint savings after she died, to fund the down payment on a lake cabin he had claimed was for the future of the family. That was the inheritance twist I never saw coming. My aunt, Evelyn, had raised me more than my own mother did. When she passed, she left me a small but meaningful inheritance. Enough to be careful with, but not enough to be careless. I had trusted Ethan when he said we should put it into our future, because that was what spouses did, right? Build together, plan together, protect each other. Instead, he had used some of it to impress another woman. That realization burned worse than the affair itself, because cheating told me he didn't love me. But stealing told me he thought I was too stupid or too weak to notice. I was still gathering evidence when Ethan's mother came to visit. Linda had always liked me, or at least that's what I thought. She brought soup when I was nauseous and knitted baby blankets with little blue stars. But once she sat at my kitchen table and saw how quiet I'd become, she folded her hands and said, "Claire, a marriage goes through rough seasons. You know Ethan. He gets overwhelmed. You have to be patient with men." I looked at her. "Are you aware he's seeing another woman?" Her face changed. Just slightly. A blink too slow. A breath too shallow. So maybe she wasn't aware. Or maybe she was pretending not to be. "Either way," she said, "that's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation." She lowered her voice, as if that would make the truth less real. "You're carrying a child. Stress isn't good for you. Whatever is going on, you need to think about the family." I stared at her for a long time before saying, "I am thinking about the family. That's why I'm no longer pretending this is normal." Her mouth tightened. She left 10 minutes later. That night, Ethan asked me why his mother had been crying in her car. I said, "Maybe because she's finally meeting the man you've become." He went still. Then he asked, "What is that supposed to mean?" That was the first time he raised his voice in front of me since I got pregnant. "What it means," I said, keeping my own voice low because the baby had been kicking hard and I needed to stay steady, "is that I know about Brielle. I know about the apartment. I know about the money." For one long second, he didn't move. Then his face went blank, which was worse than rage. "Who told you that name?" he said. I stared at him, disgusted by the fact that his biggest concern was the source of my information, not the fact that he had been caught. He stepped toward me. "Claire, listen to me." "No, you listen to me." I remember the room being very still. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, one of our neighbors was mowing their lawn. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked as the air conditioning shifted. It was such an ordinary backdrop for a life falling apart. I said, "You lied to me for months." He shrugged slightly, as if he could still reduce the whole thing to an argument. "This isn't what you think." "That's funny," I said, "because I think you're cheating on me." His jaw tightened. "I've been unhappy for a long time." There it was. The oldest excuse in the book. The one cheaters reach for when they want their betrayal to sound like a natural disaster instead of a choice. I laughed then, but it came out cracked. Unhappy, I said. You're unhappy because I'm pregnant? He looked away. No, he said. I'm unhappy because everything changed. You changed. I stared at him, stunned. I changed because I'm carrying your child. I'm just saying this has been hard on both of us. I took a deep breath, slow and careful. Then say the truth. Say you wanted someone else. Say you stole from me. Say you thought I'd stay because I was pregnant and terrified. He said nothing. That silence told me everything. So I reached into the drawer beside the stove and placed a thick envelope on the table between us. His eyes narrowed. What is that? Divorce papers. He let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. You're bluffing. No, I said, calm as still water. I'm pregnant, not trapped. He picked up the envelope, but didn't open it. He just stared at my face, trying to decide whether I was serious. Then he smiled. Not a kind smile. A smug one. You really think you can do this? He asked. With no job right now? With a baby on the way? Where exactly do you think you're going to go? I looked at him for a long moment and felt something inside me harden into iron. He thought I was helpless. He thought being pregnant meant I was weak. He thought I would beg, cry, forgive, and stay. He had no idea I had spent the last 6 weeks rebuilding my life brick by brick. I've already found an apartment, I said. I've already spoken to my attorney. I've already opened my own account. And I've already moved my most important documents somewhere you can't touch them. His face changed then. That was the first time he looked afraid. Not remorseful. Not sorry. Afraid. Because men like Ethan don't panic when they realize they've hurt someone. They panic when they realize they may lose control. Claire, he said, trying a different tone, softer now. This is not what you want. I leaned forward. You don't get to tell me what I want anymore. He tried to argue, but I held up my hand. I know about the money you moved, I said. I know about the inheritance. I know about the cabin. I know Brielle's apartment is in your name as a secondary contact. I know you've been telling people I'm unstable because you wanted to prepare for custody. That last part made his face go pale. Because yes, I knew that too. A neighbor's cousin worked in the same office as Ethan, and the world is smaller than people think. I had been told, quietly, that he had started asking around about what judges usually do with pregnant wives who are emotional. Like I was a legal problem instead of the mother of his child. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I said, I'm done being your cover story. For the first time in months, he had no answer. The next day, I delivered the divorce papers to the office he was co-owner of with his cousin and his business partner, Mark. I did not mail them. I did not leave them in the house. I brought them myself. Marisol had advised me to serve him in a way that would leave no room for games. So I waited until noon, when his office lobby was full of contractors, vendors, and a couple of clients. I wore a navy dress that fit my belly comfortably and heels that made me feel more powerful than I had in weeks. My hair was pulled back. My face was calm. Ethan was standing by the coffee machine when I walked in. He looked up, saw me, and his expression shifted from annoyance to alarm in about half a second. What are you doing here? I smiled politely and handed the envelope to the receptionist, then spoke loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Please make sure Ethan receives these. They're divorce papers. The lobby went silent. I watched his face drain of color. He took the envelope from the receptionist, but he didn't open it. He just stared at it like it had become radioactive. Claire, he said through clenched teeth. Not here. I looked around at the people staring at us. Then where? In private while you keep lying? A woman near the front desk dropped her pen. Ethan's voice sharpened. You're making a spectacle of yourself. No, I said, still calm. I'm ending a marriage. He stepped toward me, lowering his voice. You're pregnant. Yes, I said. And still not stupid. That line moved through the office like electricity. I saw Mark, his business partner, freeze near a filing cabinet. I saw one of the contractors pretend to study his phone. I saw Ethan realize, too late, that his humiliation had a room full of witnesses. He grabbed my arm lightly, trying to steer me toward the hallway. I pulled free immediately and said, louder this time, "Don't touch me." That did it. His hand dropped. Then he smiled in that fake, dangerous way again and said, "You're emotional. That's all this is." I turned to the people in the lobby and said, "He's been having an affair with a woman named Brielle, while spending part of my inheritance and hiding money from our joint accounts." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And Ethan, for the first time in his life, looked truly, deeply exposed. Mark cleared his throat and looked away. The receptionist looked horrified. One of the contractors muttered, "Jesus." Ethan's face went red. "You don't have to do this." "Oh, but I do," I said. "Because you thought pregnancy made me powerless. You thought betrayal would trap me. You thought I'd wait until after the baby was born so you could keep draining the accounts and rewriting the story." I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at him one last time. "And for the record," I said, "the baby and I will be fine. You, however, are about to find out what happens when the woman you underestimated finally opens her eyes." I walked out before he could answer. My hands were shaking so badly by the time I reached my car that I had to sit down before starting the engine. Not because I was scared, because I was done pretending this wasn't hurting me. I cried for exactly 4 minutes in the driver's seat. Then I wiped my face, called Marisol, and asked her to file the next motion immediately. The divorce moved faster than Ethan expected because he had made almost every mistake a man can make when he thinks he's smarter than the person he's betraying. He had left a paper trail. He had used joint funds for personal and hidden expenses. He had transferred part of my inheritance without my informed consent. He had text messages that clearly showed him promising Brielle, "Everything will be settled after the baby." And, perhaps most damning of all, he had messages telling a friend that he planned to wait until Claire is too pregnant to fight. That friend, apparently, had a conscience after all, because he handed the texts over to Marisol after Ethan's office scandal made him nervous. By then, the affair had started to unravel on its own. Brielle wasn't as loyal as Ethan believed. Once the divorce became public and she realized he had been lying to her too, she did the thing some women do when they discover the man they are dating is more interested in using them than loving them. She cut him off. Or maybe she cut him off because she found out he was drowning in legal trouble and no longer looked like a good future. Either way, it was not my problem. I thought the worst part would be the legal fight, but the worst part was Ethan trying to pull me back in. He showed up at my apartment one evening with flowers, and a speech rehearsed so badly it sounded like it had been scraped together from a self-help book. "Claire," he said, standing in the doorway while I held my belly and kept my face expressionless, "I made a mistake." I almost asked him which one. Instead, I said, "You made several." He swallowed and held the flowers out like they were a peace offering to a hostage. "I don't want to lose my family." I looked at him carefully. "Then you shouldn't have destroyed it." He started talking then, fast and desperate. He said he had been lonely, pressured, confused, overwhelmed. He said the pregnancy had scared him. He said he never meant for things to get so far. "It got out of hand," he said. I nearly laughed again. No, it had not gotten out of hand. It had gone exactly where he had taken it. He promised he would cut Brielle off. He promised counseling. He promised to come home. He promised to be there for the baby. And if you've ever watched a liar try to resurrect himself after the truth arrives, you know how ridiculous it feels. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the woman he hoped I still was. But I was no longer that woman. I told him, "You do not get to call it a mistake when it was a pattern." He looked wounded then, which almost made me pity him. Except pity is hard to hold when you remember someone's hand on another person's waist while you're carrying his child alone. He asked if he could at least be involved in the baby's life. That was the only time I hesitated. Because the baby was innocent. Because no matter how angry I knew my child deserved to know where they came from. But I also knew Ethan wanted access, not responsibility. So I said, "You can ask the court for what you earn. Nothing more. And until then, you'll communicate through Marisol, not me." He stared at me in disbelief, as if boundaries were an unfair surprise. When he finally left, he set the flowers down in the hallway like a man abandoning a prop after the show ended. The month after that was a storm of legal paperwork, bank freezes, and quiet, hard decisions. I moved into a smaller apartment on the south side of town, near a park and a small prenatal clinic. My old life fit into 4 boxes: one stroller, a bag of baby clothes from my neighbor, and a stack of legal files. I had never imagined starting over while pregnant. It felt impossible at first. I was tired all the time. My feet hurt, my back hurt. Sometimes I woke up at night with fear pressing on my chest like a weight. But fear, I discovered, is different when it has nowhere to live. The day the court ordered a temporary financial freeze on the accounts Ethan had been hiding money in, I got a message from him that simply said, "You ruined everything." I stared at it for a long time before replying, "No, you did." That was the last text I sent him for weeks. Then came the major twist, the one neither Ethan nor Brielle saw coming. It turned out the cabin he had bought with money from my inheritance and our joint account wasn't just a secret getaway. It was collateral. He had taken out a loan against it to cover business debts he hadn't told anyone about. His company had been losing money for months because he had been funneling funds into his personal life and trying to keep appearances up. The same man who had told me I was dramatic because I bought one expensive prenatal pillow had been bleeding money into lies so he could pretend he was thriving. When the bank discovered the discrepancy, the loan went into default. When the business partner discovered Ethan had been mixing personal and company funds, Mark took immediate action. Ethan was removed from decision-making, and soon after, the partnership collapsed into a legal mess of its own. Suddenly, the man who had asked me where I thought I was going with a baby on the way was the one scrambling to stay afloat. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Brielle dumped him the week the money dried up. Apparently, the romance had been very easy when Ethan was paying for dinner, hotels, and weekend trips. Less romantic when he was facing lawsuits and a baby he could no longer pretend didn't exist. One afternoon, months after the papers had been served, I saw him outside a gas station off the interstate. Not with Brielle. Not in a truck. Not looking confident. He was alone, unshaven, with a paper cup in his hand and a worn jacket that had seen better years. He was asking people for cash. For a long moment, I just sat in my car and stared through the windshield, stunned by how quickly a man's pride can become a curbside shadow when he spends too long assuming everyone else is beneath him. I didn't feel triumph the way I thought I would. I didn't feel joy. I felt a quiet, steady certainty. Not all revenge is loud. Some of it is simply time telling the truth. The real victory came later, in a courtroom that smelled faintly of paper and old coffee, while my attorney calmly laid out the evidence of his financial misconduct, the hidden transfers, the unauthorized use of my inheritance, and the affair he had tried to weaponize against me. The judge looked at Ethan for a long moment before ruling in my favor on the major financial issues. I was awarded the protected portion of the inheritance, a fair division of assets, and child support established through proper legal channels once the baby was born. Ethan tried to argue. He tried to look sympathetic. He even tried to say he and I had mutually drifted apart, which would have been funny if he hadn't been insulting everyone's intelligence. The judge was not impressed. Neither was I. When it was over, I walked out of that courthouse with my attorney, one hand on my belly, and felt the cold November air hit my face like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. My son was born 6 weeks later. I named him Oliver. He came into the world on a snowy morning, loud and red-faced and furious to be separated from me. And when the nurse placed him on my chest, I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Not because I was sad, because I was exhausted in the oldest, deepest way and finally safe enough to feel it. Ethan showed up at the hospital with flowers and a face full of regret. But by then, I had built a wall around my peace that he no longer knew how to climb. He asked if he could hold the baby. I looked at Oliver's tiny face, then at the man who had once thought betrayal would trap me forever, and said, "After everything is handled properly." He nodded like a man accepting the terms of his own consequences. That was the last moment I felt anything close to mercy for him. Months passed. Life settled. Not perfectly, not magically, but honestly, I went back to work part-time. I learned how to balance a baby bottle in one hand and a stack of invoices in the other. I learned how to sleep in chunks and still function. I learned that healing isn't dramatic. It's repetitive. It's making oatmeal before dawn. It's filling out forms. It's letting your son nap on your chest while the world outside keeps moving. And somewhere along the way, I began to feel like myself again. Not the wife I had been. Not the woman Ethan had underestimated. Something better, stronger, quieter, harder to manipulate. One evening, almost a year after I found Brielle laughing in my kitchen, I stood in my apartment doorway holding Oliver against my shoulder while the sunset turned the windows gold. The apartment was small, but it was mine. The furniture was mismatched. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo of Oliver and me at the park. There was no expensive cabin, no polished illusion, no man pretending loyalty while building a second life behind my back. Just peace. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan asking if he could come by to discuss rebuilding trust. I read it once, then handed the phone to the trash can and deleted the message without replying. Because some doors do not need to be slammed. They only need to be closed. People sometimes ask me whether I regret what I did. I don't. I regret the years I spent shrinking myself to protect a man who was never protecting me. I regret ignoring the first signs because I wanted the family more than I wanted the truth. I regret trusting someone who mistook my kindness for weakness. But I do not regret gathering the evidence. I do not regret serving the papers in front of his coworkers. I do not regret making him face the reality he had tried so hard to hide. And I definitely do not regret showing my son, when he is old enough to understand, that his mother did not stay silent when she was betrayed. Because that is the real lesson in this story. Not that revenge is sweet, not that cheating always ruins a man, not even that karma eventually finds people who think they are untouchable. The real lesson is this. Some women do not break when you trap them in a lie. Some women become dangerous in the most beautiful way possible. They get calm. They get organized. They get smarter than the man who thought they were helpless. They make legal appointments. They print bank statements. They protect the baby. And then, when the time is right, they put the divorce papers on the table where dinner was supposed to be. Ethan once thought pregnancy had made me weak enough to keep me obedient. Instead, it made me strategic. He thought I had nowhere to go. I went somewhere better. I went toward the truth. And the last time I heard anything about him, he was working temporary jobs, trying to rebuild the pieces of a life he had thrown away, while I was at home with my son, teaching him the only kind of love I ever wanted him to know. The kind that tells the truth. The kind that doesn't disappear when things get hard. The kind that never needs another woman to feel important. So yes, when people ask whether he was speechless when he found the divorce papers on the dinner table, I tell them the truth. He was speechless. But I wasn't. For the first time in a long time, I had all the words.